Close your eyes and picture New York City in the 1870s. The Civil War is over, but its scars still linger. Manhattan is swelling with immigrants. The streets are thick with horse dung and cigar smoke, and buildings stretch higher with every year. The old Five Points neighborhood, long the world's most notorious slum, still festers with poverty. Poverty, however, breeds opportunity, and where respectable citizens see chaos and danger, others sense profit. Out of the dim back rooms of gin mills and cheap boarding houses, gangs rise once more. Not merely rowdy boys with fists, but organized, ruthless powers of the underworld. One gang more than any other ruled these nights, the Wyos.
For nearly 2 decades, their name brought fear. Mothers whispered warnings about them to keep children indoors. Tavern keepers paid them off to keep their windows intact. Merchants lowered their eyes when one of their members strolled past. In this story, you will walk with them, through the reeking alleys of the Bowery, past clattering saloon doors, into dim back rooms where lives and livelihoods were decided with a word, a fist, or a knife. And, as always, relax your shoulders, dim the room around you, and settle in. This is no action film. This is history, retold gently, with all its shadows and whispers, until it lulls you into sleep.
The Wyos did not appear from nothing. By the 1860s, gangs like the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys had already soaked 5 Points in blood. But times were changing. The Irish were no longer the newest arrivals. They had climbed into labor and politics. New waves of Italians, Germans, and Eastern European Jews were beginning to pile into the overcrowded Lower East Side. Each group carried its own scars of hunger and displacement, and into this swirling cauldron, gangs were reborn. The Wyos took root in those crooked streets. The very name Wyo comes from the bird-like whistle the members used to summon one another. To hear "Wyo, Wyo" cutting through the Bowery at midnight was enough to make even the drunkest reveler keep his eyes down and hurry home. Unlike the rowdy brawlers before them, the Wyos moved with a strange order. They fought, yes, but they also organized. They demanded payment from brothel keepers. They demanded protection money from shopfronts, and they ran taverns of their own. To walk their turf without acknowledgement was to invite a punishment that might range from a black eye to something much grimmer. They had taken the raw chaos of the earlier street wars and sharpened it into an underworld economy. The Wyos gained a reputation not only for violence, but for creativity with it. Legends tell of members carrying a menu of services they would provide. $2 for a black eye, $15 for biting off an ear, $100 for the big job, meaning murder. Whether this price list ever truly existed or was just a journalist's flourish, it was repeated so often in newspapers and taverns alike that it might as well have been carved into stone. In a city where the police were barely trusted, the Wyos became law of their own. If a shopkeeper paid them regularly, his shutters stayed intact. If he refused, he would find bricks through his windows, missing shipments, or worse. Their violence wasn't random, it was calculated, leveraged to remind neighbors that protection meant permits to breathe safely in those narrow, filthy streets.
And yet, in their own saloons, the Wyos gathered like brothers, laughing, sharing drinks, telling tales. They were not monsters to one another. They were survivors who had decided society's rules had never been written for them. Better to write their own.
Every gang is remembered for its characters, and the Wyos had plenty. Dandy John Dolan is said to have carried a copper eye gouger, a cruel little tool made just for blinding opponents. He supposedly wore boots that had blades hidden in the soles, so that every kick left torn flesh behind. Another member, famed as Piker Ryan, was remembered as much for his drunken jokes as for his casual cruelty. Tales circulated of him carrying cards listing prices for fights. Danny Driscoll, one of the Wyos leaders, gained celebrity after shooting a woman in a quarrel over another lover. His capture and execution in 1888 made headlines across New York. The public who once feared him lined up to watch his downfall. And yet, even then, there were murmurs of admiration. For in the strange underworld code, the Wyos embodied a kind of brazen loyalty to their own cause. Some members were barely more than boys. Desperation brought them in, the chance of a meal, a place to sleep, a sliver of pride. Some were lifers, men too far gone to ever wash themselves clean of crime. Together they wove a tapestry of menace that hung heavy over Manhattan's working-class wards. The Wyos domain stretched across lower Manhattan, the Bowery, the crowded East Side tenements, and especially Five Points. They ran taverns that doubled as headquarters. From dim backroom tables, strategies were whispered, plans drawn, targets chosen. Whether it was counterfeiting, burglary, or blackmail, the Wyos dabbled in it all. The police, plagued with corruption and underfunded, often looked the other way. Indeed, many a Wyo could count someone in uniform as a friend, or at least as a man well greased with bribes. Merchants, too, quickly learned the ritual of setting aside coin each week for the gang. In return, a tavern might run uninterrupted, a gambling house might stay unbothered, a dockhand might receive protection from rivals. Of course, rival gangs did still exist, but in the 1870s, none dared openly challenge the Wyos for long. Their name alone hung like smoke over the streets they claimed. For ordinary people, the Wyos were both curse and shield. A cobbler who paid the fee might never see his window smashed. A tavern that kept them in whiskey might never struggle with drunks tearing the place apart. But anyone who fell behind owed not only coin, but blood. Life in these tenements was already grim. Families crammed into single airless rooms, water hauled up in buckets, disease and rats as constant companions. Against that backdrop, gangs provided young men with purpose, however twisted, and gave neighborhoods a brutal form of order. Violence was predictable. A debt unpaid would be punished. A tavern defiant would be wrecked. But in a strange way, lives moved forward, buffered by this grim predictability. And so the Wyos were hated, feared, but also accommodated, tolerated, even woven into the city's daily rhythm. No gang rises forever. By the mid-1880s, the Wyos' power brought as much notoriety as profit. The newspapers devoured their stories, splashing every stabbing and shooting across front pages. Reformers demanded stronger police actions, and even corrupt politicians began to feel that protecting the Wyos endangered their own standing. The execution of Danny Driscoll in 1888 marked the beginning of the end. Without his leadership, the gang frayed. One by one, older members were jailed or killed. Younger criminals, hungrier and more ambitious, drifted into newer gangs with new names. Soon, the Wyos were a legend, told more in newspapers than in alleys. A story that still scared children but no longer ruled the streets. Yet their influence did not vanish. Out of their ranks came the style, the discipline, the networks that fed directly into the birth of New York's more modern organized crime. In their heyday, the Wyos had been the uneasy kings of Night's empire, and their shadow lingered long afterward. Tonight, you have walked the grim avenues of the 1870s underworld, where the Wyos, part myth, part muscle, ruled with broken fists and whispered whistles. Their lives were harsh, brutal, often short, But their legend outlived every man who walked those filthy blocks. Gang names fade. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Wyos, each had their rise and their fall. Yet their stories remain, etched deep into New York's history. Stories of fear, survival, and strange honor among those who had almost nothing. And as these whispers fade, you may close your own eyes now. Rest on a bed softer than straw, safer than any back alley boarding house. Let the past slip softly back into silence, carrying you into sleep.